Hi to this tutorial in which we're going to learn to create something like this. It's a fairly abstract animation, but the main thing is that we're going to start using sound in After Effects. So I'm just going to go to After Effects and then go to Finder just to find those assets that you downloaded, which is like a couple of movie files and one sound file. And I'm just going to drag them in here. And then create a folder that I call Footage. Another one that I call Audio. Then I'm just going to drag all of those assets into the respective folders. Right, and then I want to create another folder that is called Compositions. Now, because audio starts with an A and composition with a C, it's not on top of my folder structure, but I kind of like to see my compositions on top, just to like always immediately see what I need and what I want to change. So I'm just going to hit enter and rename compositions and just add like a little underscore in front of it, and all it does, it just makes sure that it's always sitting on top of the project window, so it's the first thing I see I can access. Right, so then we are going to create a new composition with the dimensions. Well, I'm going to call it sound comp, and it's going to be 960 by 540 pixels in 25 frames per second and 10 seconds length is also fine. So those are dimensions. I click OK, and then I'm just going to drag my wave files and my sound file into the composition. Right, so obviously I don't see anything, and I can hit spacebar. And it kind of previews with audio, but that's a fairly new thing to After Effects, because it used to be, like, there are different ways of previewing stuff, and spacebar is usually the one that only previews a picture. The other one other thing that is called RAM Preview, and in order to show you that, I'm just going to, well, it's probably open somewhere already, but I'm just going to get it back up. There's this window that's called Preview, because basically I'm working on a laptop, and if you had a proper computer, you'd have the number keypad on the right-hand side, which has a 0. It's called the numpad 0. If you hit that 0, that way you can preview something that's called a RAM preview. And what that does, it pre-calculates every frame, and it will preview it at exactly the right speed that it would actually play at when you export it as a movie. And whereas with spacebar, sometimes you have lots of layers and it doesn't actually pre-calculate the frames. So you might have delays, it might not be real-time speed. So if you want to make sure you preview something properly and with sound, either hit the numpad 0 if you have a proper computer, or if you just select numpad 0 here and then hit the play stop preview button, that will make you a really nice RAM preview. You know, we might not need that right now, but just wanted to make you aware. So for now, spacebar is fine as well, but in previous After Effects versions it wouldn't work. So sound, I got the sound in my composition, and I'm a very visual person, so I kind of want to see what the sound looks like rather than just listen to it. It's quite tedious to always have to listen through to know where something's going on. So I'm just going to open up the sound file and the audio, and then I have something called audio levels, and then there's the waveform. And as you can see, that basically visualizes the sound. And if I play it from here, I can kind of see, you know, oh, something's going on in the audio there, which might not work with every audio file, but this one's quite visual as well. So, you know, there's something going on, and there's something going on, there's something that's louder and a bit more quiet. And if you have lots of different sound files within one composition, you might want to adjust the audio levels against each other. You might want to make one more quiet than the other one a bit louder, just to kind of level them out against each other. So just pay attention to what happens here in the waveform. If I drag this down, you can see the whole waveform kind of gets a bit lower, and if I play it now, it's a lot quieter than it was before. So I'm just going to set that back to 0. Obviously you can like crank it up the other way as well, but I'm just going to set it back to 0 and do that. Alright, so now I want to create like a very simple animation. just like a graphic circle, and then I want to jazz it up a bit by adding little bits and bobs to it. So first of all, I want to create a white background. And there's an After Effects internal asset that you can use, which is called solid, and all it is a solid color of any color that you can choose. For this, I just want to create a white background, so I'm going to go to Layer, New, Solid, or you can also hit that shortcut Command Y. Solids have lots of different uses, but at the moment all we want to use it for is to change the background color. So first of all, I'm going to pick a color. I'm going to pick white. And just to make sure that it's the same size as my composition, I'm just going to hit the button and then click OK. And now we just have a nice white background. Next we want to create the circle. So as we did before, I'm just going to use the ellipse tool. And I kind of want to create it central, the middle, and I kind of like click here, hold down Shift to restrain proportions. Kind of drag it, but it's quite hard to make sure that it's sitting in the middle. And if you want to make sure that it's black or whichever color you want to choose, up here you have the fill and the stroke. I already had it set to black, so up here I can choose whichever color I want the circle to be if I use that tool. So it's set to black, so that's perfect for me right now. Right, but there's a way to kind of, rather than draw it from a corner, I can draw it from the middle. So if I click here and start dragging it and then hit Command at the same time, it will draw from the center from wherever I clicked. But as you can see, I'm not very good with actually drawing the circle in the middle of the screen. So I'm just going to go for this now. And then I'm going to quickly use the pen behind tool to make sure I have the shape there, select just to readjust the anchor point, because I wanted to scale from that point and not from any point on that shape. But I kind of wanted to rotate to scale from the center if I scale it. So now if I hit S for scale, it's a shortcut that I introduced, that we've already introduced. So basically S, all it does, it unfolds the scale property here. So I hit S and I'm going to go back to the selection tool, and now it actually scales from the center. But you might be better than me in drawing a circle from the center. Right, so I'm just going to put it back in the middle here. And then I already have scale unfolded here. And all I want to do is kind of modify it in sync with the sound, just a little bit. And then we're going to jazz up the space around it. So here, for example, it has these kind of flip, flip, these little sounds. And I just want to have it like slightly pulsing bigger and smaller around this point. So I'm just going to activate animation for the scale property. So I'm hitting that stopwatch in the front, which adds a keyframe here. And then because at the moment I'm dealing with like tiny intervals of time, you can see it's 1 second, 2 seconds here, but this interval is really, really small. But I want to see a bit closer what's going on and where my keyframes will be positioned. So on the bottom of the timeline there are these mountains, they're called zoom out and zoom in of the timeline. And what that does is if I click on here, you can see it just zooms into the timeline. Now my time intervals are a lot shorter. So that's like 20 frames, 25 frames, 5 frames, 10 frames. So that's 2 seconds here still, but I can now see it like a lot smaller time interval. And now it's a lot easier to say, right here, I probably want it to be, I probably want my circle to be slightly bigger. And then after the peak, kind of when the audio goes down again, I'm just going to set it back to 100. Right. Well, that's probably positioned right there, but I just want to drag that keyframe in a bit. So now if I hit play, it just kind of pulses a tiny bit. Kind of becomes bigger and then smaller again. And I want to repeat that on like that second little audio bump. And of course I could add another keyframe here and keep going, but I'm a fan of kind of making things as quickly as possible. So rather than creating those keyframes, I'm just going to select those keyframes and copy and paste them because I want it to be exactly the same motion. So I'm selecting these keyframes and hitting Command C and then Command V, just like you would copy anything on the hard drive. I'm just going to drag them over here so that that one kind of hits the peak of that audio. And that was just Command C, Command V, I just copied and pasted those keyframes. You know, for the rest of the composition, we can do lots more little bits, so maybe in the end, see, that's not actually the end, because now we're looking at a tiny bit of the timeline, and now I just want to go back to seeing the whole timeline again, so I'm just going to zoom out. Right, so now I can see from 0 to 10 seconds again. So there's another bit here, where it kind of has a bit of a zoomy beepy sound, so I just want to repeat the animation here as well. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste here, but maybe this time it can last a bit longer. And then at the very end, I just wanted to kind of slowly, gradually scale down while it's doing that sound. So at this point, I'm just going to add in another keyframe which has exactly the same value as this one. And the way to do that is here you can see these arrows that basically, you can use them to skip between your different keyframes. So if I click here, the current time will automatically snap to the previous keyframe. And I can do it like this and like that, kind of go between keyframes. But then in between, you know, there's this little icon that looks like a keyframe. If I hit this, it will add another keyframe without changing the value. So the value of this keyframe is 100, just like the previous one is 100. So it doesn't change the value, it just adds another keyframe. So in between them, there's no animation. Right, and then from here, I just want to scale it down, not quite to 0, but I just want it to like slowly drift and become slightly smaller. Maybe a little bit more. Right. You know, there's a lot you can do with this, and feel free to do the rest as well. But you know, it's the same technique. I could just keep adding more keyframes to it. But what I'm interested in now that I have like a bit of an animation going on with a circle here, it looks very, very graphic. You know, it's a black circle on a white ground. So I just want to add a bit of life to the circle, just add like winks of color. And if we just have a look at one of these end flares, they're called, if I double click it in here, what it will do, it will open the footage end flare. It's not in my composition, I haven't dragged it into the composition, it just means that I can now look at what the footage does before I add it to my composition. And what it does is kind of has this flickery red coloured wash. And that's quite nice. I'm just going to look at the second one as well. You know, it's a slightly different flicker, different colour tone. Right, but they're kind of good. Alright, so now I just need to make sure that at the moment I'm looking at the footage, I just want to go back to the sound composition here. So now I'm looking at my circle again and this timeline. So I'm just going to drag the first end flare to the top of my composition. I want to make sure it's sitting at the very top of everything, and you can see it's a lot shorter than the length of my composition. And with this kind of that little sound there comes up, I want the color to just like do a bit of something interesting. So I'm just going to drag this layer, the start and end point of this layer, just here, kind of to where that fuzzy sound comes up. Now, in my stage I can see that this piece of footage is actually smaller than my composition. So I'm just going to click on that corner, and generally I would say don't kind of descale your footage, kind of try to restrain the proportions, but this is so abstract it doesn't really matter. All I want to make sure is that it covers my whole composition. So at the moment this is what it does. Sorry, this is just that the computer runs better again. It's running a bit slow. Right, so, you know, at the moment it's covering up my circle, but I kind of wanted to just jazz it up a bit and add a bit of colour to it. And this is probably something that you know from After Effects already, which are modes. At the moment the mode is set to normal, so it's just solid and it's just covering up the content underneath. And this can now be changed to any mode that you know from After Effects. The one to go for at the moment is probably Add or Screen, which basically turns anything dark, any blacks in that image, transparent. So I'm just going to set it to Add maybe. And now, because it kind of it makes black transparent and emerges. So wherever the background is white, you can't see it, but within the circle that's black, it shows up. So that works quite well with the audio, I find. It's kind of like sizzly and abstract, which is quite nice. Cool. So I'm just going to save my project to make sure I don't lose work. So I'm just going to call that sound project. Alright. Well, and now that way we can kind of reposition a few more of those flares within the composition. Maybe while it scales up here, I want to add another one there, so I'm just going to use a second one, drag it in the composition, reposition it in the timeline, make sure that it covers up the whole composition, and just set the mode back to screen or add. Now, there might be that when you open up After Effects that you do not see this where it says mode. You might not have that because there's lots of different things you can add to the timeline. But in order to keep an overview and you might not need everything, you can hide it or add it. So in case you do not see this here, all you need to do is right click, go to columns, and make sure that modes is checked. I'm just going to uncheck it now to show you. So now it's just gone here, I don't see it, which means I have more space for my keyframes in my timeline. If you want to add it, just make sure you right click on this top grey kind of band of the timeline and then go to columns, modes, just in case if you don't see it, and then that way you can access the modes. Right, so now we kind of have added a bit of interest to the black part, to where the circle is. But now I feel like all of that white stuff is still a bit blunt and, you know, it could be a bit more interesting. So for that, what I want to use is either the grain or the lines. But first of all, let's have a look at what it actually looks like. So I'm going to choose the lines, just double click on it. You know, it's quite noisy, grainy, a bit TV, kind of really old TV style grain and lines running through. And that's quite cool. And the other one, grain, kind of looks like this. Just a few dots, occasionally a line comes in. So whichever one you want to use, I'm just going to go back to the sound composition and drag either one of them. I'm going to choose grain and just drag that underneath the two flares. You can drag it on top, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to drag it underneath. Right, so I want this to kind of affect the white areas. So what I want to do is I only want to have these little dots that show. I don't want to have all the black stuff. So first of all, what I need to do is I want to invert the color space of the layer. So I want to make the white bits black and the black bits white. And the way to do that, there's a simple effect that's called invert. So make sure you have your grain layer selected, and then I go to Effect, Channel, Invert. And that just flips the whole color space around. So whites are black, blacks are white. Perfect. So now instead of screen mode, I want to use multiply. And voila, now we have these little black bits only showing up in the white space because they can't show up in the black space because it's already black. You know, it's quite interesting how they do work with the audio and they kind of add to that sizzling sound, that level of noise, and just adds a bit more interest to the white background, to this very graphic animation. Now we have a problem that's kind of not long enough for our composition. You know, there you can see that the layer ends and it kind of pops off. But that's alright, we might not need it in the end, or we could just duplicate it. So I'm just going to hit Command D to duplicate that layer, which is this one. We already used it, it just duplicates stuff in After Effects. So now I have the layer twice. And I just want to drag in the timeline just to, once the first layer stops, the second one starts. And that way we just have grain all the way through. Because it's so abstract you can't really tell, it doesn't matter. Alright. And that's basically it. So now we've added a bit of color kind of to the black parts. We made a very abstract animation. We did it back here again. We added a little bit of animation to the circle, and we just added a bit more interest to all the white bits. And now the last thing we need to make sure is that we render it out with the audio, with the sounds. So I'm going to Composition, Add to Render Queue, And the latest version of After Effects is really clever, so generally it does it automatically, but what you used to have to do, and I usually make sure I do it anyways, just so I know what I'm exporting is correct, is I'm going to click the output module, click on where it says lossless, and I just want to make sure at the moment it says audio put auto, which means if there is audio in the comp it will export it, otherwise it won't. But I just want to set it to on, just to be sure. And then I also want to change the codec to H.264 to have a smaller file and to make it better playable. Right, and that's all I want to change, and then I just hit render. And thanks for watching.